the creature of the dark dawn in the dark and gloomy village of Saint-Hilaire, in the depths of the French countryside. The 19th century marked a time of superstition and blind faith. The villagers lived their days in unsettling peace, clinging to the protection of the small village church and the prayers of Father Bernard, a man of deep faith and austere character. But darkness hangs over even the most pious hearts. One night, as Father Bernard slept in his austere room in the rectory, a tiny, vile creature, born from the shadows themselves, found its way to the church. It was a weak, slow-moving creature, almost pathetic in appearance, but with an evil purpose. His eyes shone with twisted intelligence, and his only hope of survival was to find a host. He slid across the stone floors, his barely perceptible body, until he finally reached Father Bernard's mouth. In a grotesque act, the creature slowly entered the priest's body, taking advantage of his deep sleep. Once inside, he took control, merging with his soul, corrupting his faith, and using his body as an instrument for his dark designs. From that night on, Father Bernard began to change. However, to the villagers, his actions seemed as pious as ever. He maintained his normal behavior during the day, inspiring sermons, visits to the sick, and comfort to the afflicted. His kindly face and faith-filled words seemed intact, dispelling any suspicions that might have arisen in the villagers' minds. But as night fell, Bernard became something else. Under the cover of darkness, the creature controlled him completely, guiding his steps on a path of terror and death. The first act of terror occurred on the night of October 1874. Marie, the village baker, was the first victim. One night, as he was closing his shop, he felt a presence behind him. Before he could turn around, a cold hand covered his mouth. Bernard, with inexplicable force, dragged her into the church. There, at the altar, he subjected her to a dark ritual, cutting her skin into strange and macabre patterns. When he was done, he hung his dismembered body on the door of the church as a sinister offering. The next morning, villagers found Marie's mutilated body. Horrified by his condition, the relatives preferred not to see the body, trusting that Father Bernard would take care of the burial. Taking advantage of his role as the gravekeeper, Bernard stole the body before burial, taking it to the basement of the church for his dark purposes. Marie symbolized Christian charity, a virtue that Bernard had promoted throughout his life. By murdering her, the creature not only corrupted Marie's flesh, but also destroyed in Bernard any vestige of compassion. replacing it with a dark pleasure in the destruction of innocence. On the night of October 11, 1874, Pierre, the town's sturdy blacksmith, was the next victim. Returning home late after a long day, he was surprised by a figure that emerged from the shadows. It was Bernard, with an expression that mixed pity and hatred. Before Pierre could defend himself, the priest attacked him with brutal force. Pinning his head to an anvil, Bernard poured molten metal over his face, horribly disfiguring it. His body was found at dawn, a macabre and twisted figure in its own forge. Once again, the relatives, terrified by the sight of the disfigured body, decided not to hold a public ceremony. Bernard, with his influence, managed to appropriate the corpse and took it to the same dark fate in the basement of the church. Pierre represented perseverance and sacrifice, values that Bernard deeply admired. By murdering him, the creature eradicated in Bernard any connection with the value of effort and dedication, leaving in its place a void where there had once been devotion. On the night of October 27, the night of October 2070, one of the most influential families in the town, the Delacroixes, were decimated in a single night. Charles, the patriarch, his spouse, Elise, and their teenage daughter, Amélie, were found dead in their luxurious mansion. Each had been killed differently. Charles was slowly suffocated, Elise was drowned in her own bathroom, and Amélie was found in her room with bite marks all over her body, as if she had been eaten by a wild creature. Bernard had orchestrated each death with unsettling precision, leaving the scene a macabre spectacle. Bernard's influence allowed him, once again, to get hold of the bodies before burial. The villagers, still unsuspecting the priest, trusted him to give the Delacroix a dignified rest. But instead of performing the sacred rites, Bernard added the corpses to the growing amorphous mass brewing deep within the church. The Delacroixes represented power and responsibility in the community, elements of life that Bernard had deeply respected. By murdering them, the creature annihilated the last notions of order and authority in Bernard's mind, plunging him into total chaos, where only the will of the evil entity prevailed. The creature that controlled Bernard did not choose its victims at random. Each murder had a specific purpose, designed to slowly corrupt and dismantle the priest's faith and humanity. Bernard left the bodies at the scene of the murders to spread terror in the village, allowing fear and uncertainty to erode the villagers' faith. When the terror had fulfilled its purpose, Bernard recovered the bodies to integrate them into the amorphous mass that the creature was forming in the basement. Each corpse, with its corrupted soul, strengthened a creature, bringing it closer to its final form. One night on November 7, 1874, Luc, the young altar boy who had served Father Bernard since childhood, became suspicious. He had noticed small changes in the priest's behavior, a shadow in his eyes, a slight tremor in his hands as he raised the host. He decided to follow him discreetly. Lou followed the priest into the dark, damp basements of the church. There, in the semi-darkness, he witnessed a terrifying sight. Father Bernard was kneeling before an amorphous and viscous mass made up of the bodies of the victims. This mass pulsed and twisted as if it had a life of its own. Luc watched in horror as the mass began to merge with the priest's body, who seemed ecstatic at the macabre spectacle. Gradually, the mass began to take shape, molding itself into a body that, although humanoid, had a disturbing perfection. The creature that emerged was beautiful, in an unnatural way, with androgynous features and pale skin that seemed to glow in the dark. Luke, trembling with fear, fled the basement and ran to the house of Jean, an elderly healer who had been a friend of Father Bernard for many years. Hearing Luke's story, Jean knew they could no longer trust the church or its leader. "I knew that the people were doomed if they didn't do something." He convinced Lou that he should return to the church to destroy the creature before it became stronger. That same night, on November 8, 1874, armed with torches and desperate courage, Jan and Luke returned to the church. They descended into the basement, where the creature, now fully formed, stood atop Father Bernard's collapsed body, which had been completely consumed. Luke threw his torch at the creature, but in a swift, unearthly motion, the entity avoided fire. Joan, in an act of sacrifice, drew her body towards the creature, giving Luck time to attack with an iron cross. The creature screamed with an inhuman sound as the cross dug into its flesh. The walls of the basement shook and the amorphous mass began to disintegrate, releasing an unbearable stench. Jean, caught in the process, was consumed by the shadows along with the creature. When the sun began to peak over the horizon on November 9, 1874, Lou was alone in the destroyed basement. The creature had disappeared, along with Jean's body. The church, once a refuge of faith, was now in ruins, and the village of Saint Hilaire, though free from the creature, was never the same again. Time passed, and the villagers, scarred by tragedy, rebuilt their lives, but the shadow of events never completely disappeared. Years later, a stranger came to the village and asked about Father Bernard's story. Los, now an old and worn-out man, only warned him, "Evil never dies. It only changes its form, and sometimes it takes the form of what we want most." The outsider, with a charming smile and a sinister twinkle in his eye, simply replied, "That's exactly what I was looking to hear."